Hello and welcome to this online workshop. My name is Alexey Savkin, and today we'll be talking about how to use a 12-step system for finding KPIs, and not just normal KPIs, metrics, indicators, but to find the most challenging metrics and KPIs. And that's basically the topic of this workshop today. And before this workshop, we asked all of the participants to submit some of their most challenging questions about KPIs. And actually, this will be the content of the workshop today. A few words about our plan for this workshop. First of all, I will introduce some of the cases that we have. This is the cases that we have got from our customers, from you. Then I will do a short introduction to the 12-step system for the challenging KPIs. Probably I will interrupt some of the cases when it's relevant with some demonstration of how this can be managed with the software, if it makes sense if it adds value to the discussion, of course. And then we go to the main part, to the discussion of the cases suggested by you. And we also have some shorter cases that were discussed in the questions and answers section. So basically that's the plan. And this workshop is interactive. So you had an opportunity to submit your challenges with the KPIs when you was signing up for this workshop. And also during this workshop, you can use the comments box below the video to submit your questions. So that's probably the best way to communicate and submit your challenges. And of course, after the workshop, you can always contact us and ask your questions. We're not guaranteed that we'll help you with all the details, but at least we'll be able to point you to right materials that we have on our website. So let's start with the introduction of the cases that we'll be talking about today. Most likely you will see your case here. If not, it's probably will be reviewed in questions and answers section. And for some challenges, for some questions that you have asked, I used a little bit different naming. I have chosen a little bit different formulation because it makes sense to keep them a little bit shorter. But I hope I captured the essence of your question. And some of the questions were too short to be sure about their real purpose, so I had to guess a little bit. But I hope I was more or less right by understanding your questions, and my answers will add some value to you. And first of all, thank you for all of the participants for submitting these questions, because without them, the workshop probably would be very different, not so interactive for you, not so challenging for me. And that's the question, the challenges that we had in the beginning. I grouped them into these four categories. The first one is related more to finding KPIs, the process itself, how to organize it better, how to make sure that the KPIs that you found are good ones. Then there are some technical cases, like how to validate data, how to deal with a situation when you have to work on different levels of the organization. There were some main cases covered in the main section, where actually we'll talk about different aspects of measurement, those aspects that are probably the most challenging for you. And I actually do recommend for everyone to listen carefully to not just to your case only, but to other cases as well, because the way you formulated your challenges and the way that I formulate my answers, actually, I think they will be useful for any business professional from any domain, because we can learn a lot of from different cases, not just from the cases from our own domain. And finally, the questions and answers section. Well, we're talking more about some short cases that also make sense to discuss. So let's start. And the first thing that I want to talk about is the 12-step system for challenging KPIs. This is an infographic for this 12-step system. And you can access this infographic online. To do this, you need to follow this link that you have here below. And actually, if you will need to access this link, you will always see it here in the footer of the presentation. And actually, from time to time, I will be switching to this very page to show you something interesting. So that's a system itself that you can visit using this link. And I suggest for you to review it after the workshop to systemize your knowledge a little bit. And if you like the visual picture more, you can click on this screenshot. And actually, you can access the infographic, which is probably more visual, more interactive way to teach things. Now, let me switch to the presentation again. What we have here is our 12-step system. And we'll start with it right now. Let me do a short audio check if it's working. Yes. Okay, so it's working. Perfect. So the first step of the system, actually the first 3 steps of the systems, are the most important ones. That's where the most problems happen when we talk about the indicators. The first step is decomposition. What it is. Sometimes people ask us to suggest some metrics for their business, and there are some universal metrics that work for any business. And such metrics will be related to value, quality, and performance, and probably some other. And the question is to answer the question, what is value in your very case? What is quality in your very case? What is performance in your very case? And when you do answer this question, you do decomposition. You break down the challenging, the complex idea of value. You have to break it down into smaller pieces to understand it better. So decomposition. We will have some more examples of how to do it and how beneficial it is when we'll be talking about your cases. Now, when we're talking about some, for example, value, we always talk about the value as it is perceived by someone. It's not just the value, not just an abstract value. Because if you ask about the value of the software or the quality of the software, you will have different answers from different people. So, for example, end users of the software might tell you that high quality software is that one that works fast, it doesn't have any internal issues. The software developers might tell you that the high quality software is one that has some good architecture, something like this. The point is that different people have different opinions about whatever. And to keep it simple, we will call these people stakeholders. But actually, it's not only people, also some systems are the stakeholders as well. And in the original document, in the original 12-step system, you have a link to the definitions that I like a lot. It's by Tom Gilp. Have a link to the glossary of Tom. Actually, tells that stakeholders are any person, group, or system that we want to have an interest in our project. So person or system. So it's not just one person. Normally, we can come up with a long list of stakeholders, And it makes sense because it helps us to understand what we're talking about, and it helps us to focus our measurement effort on what matters. And finally, we have the step number 3, where we need to think about the context of the measurement. To understand what the context is, we need to define why we measure things, why we measure this specific thing, why we want to measure the quality of the software. Because if we measure it to let's say to change something, it's one thing. If we want to change some aspect of quality, it's a different challenge. If we want to understand if our software is better than the software of the competitors, is a different challenge. And this purpose of the measurement will affect the things that we measure. It will affect the way that we measure things. So it's really important to understand why we measure things. And sometimes we do measurement, and we always need to align with the certain business context, with certain business goals. So this is a step number 3, and I'm not going to the details right now because we'll do a lot of discussion about this a little bit later when we'll be talking about your cases. Some of the questions that we got, I put it here, 2 questions actually. First question, what about external factors? So as I understood this question, the challenge is to take into account the external factors and present them in some way in your scorecard. And actually, what are the external factors? The external factors are the interests of some stakeholders. So it might be the interest of some person. It might be the interest of some system. So, for example, in the context of software, the external factor might be the interest of some of your partners that will promote your software. Or it might be the interest of some governmental systems that would control how your software is developed. If you're doing some businesses, for example, if you're developing some security software. So the external factor in this case will be represented by the stakeholders. And that's why it's really important to list all the stakeholders and, well, update this list when you have new stakeholders. Now, another question that we have got was, from all alternatives, how to select a good metric? And I decided to mention this question here because it actually makes sense to understand how we choose this metrics. Because if you'll be doing this, if you'll be listing stakeholders, if you'll be listing different purposes of measurement, if you will be talking about how you define the subject of measurement, how you decompose it, you'll find out that you have a long list of metrics that look very good. And the question is how to what to select, because our resources to measure are not unlimited. We have some limits. And the answer to this question is to look at the value that this metric can probably create for a stakeholder. So if we're talking about something important for one of your stakeholders, then you should assign a higher weight to this metric, and respectively, it will be a higher priority for your scorecard. And there is also another approach to this problem, to the problem of selecting good metrics among other metrics that I'll mention a little bit later when we're talking about sourcing metrics. Now, step number 4, it's about mental traps, something that we tend to do when we're working with the KPIs, when we're working with metrics. A short review again. Sometimes we have a lot of metrics, but we don't have any context for them. We don't have a purpose. We don't know why we use this metric, what business problem we want to solve by measuring those things. There is an opposite situation when we have some business goal. It's really important, but we don't have any metrics aligned with it. So we're doing this business goal blindly. sometimes when we have an option to choose between two metrics or three metrics, we choose one that is easier to measure. But normally this one is lower value for us. So that's where we tend to focus our measurement effort. And finally, sometimes when we design some metrics, when we think about some metrics, we are focusing on the metrics that are, let's say, good news metric. And we tend to avoid bad news metrics. That's probably looks good on the dashboard because everything will be in green color on your dashboard, but it doesn't help to improve the performance of your business. So these are typical, what we call mental traps. Now, step number 5, wherein you need to think about what we called bird's eye look. So you have to look at your system from top view, and you will need to decide what you have in the beginning, what you have in the end. When we're talking what we have in the beginning, I mean what is leading you to success, what are the success factors. And once you're clear about having these success factors, you will be able to define some leading metrics, the way to, let's say, quantify and measure your success factors. And the same happens with the final results. You can normally you can easily measure some activities that you do, but it's hard to differentiate those activities from the results that are valuable for the stakeholders. And that's another challenging topic for you. You need to be able to see the difference. And finally, if we are looking at the system, we normally can find some constraints, some bottlenecks. And those bottlenecks will help us to focus on the metrics that are actually more important for the measurement, for the performance improvement. Step number 6. On this step, we recognize that sometimes there are still things that cannot be measured directly. And we do suggest two ways to measure these things. One of the ways is to observe something directly. I will show you in the cases how to do this and when it makes sense to do. And another way is to do some control experiments like scientists do. And talking about control experiments, they have some disadvantage. The disadvantage is that one, it's not always possible to do a control experiment, and two, when you're doing control experiments, you are interfering with the system, interfering with the system that you want to measure, and that's why you need to be careful about this. And again, in the cases, we'll cover this a little bit more. Step number 7 is about a formal description of the metric. We will not talk a lot about this today. So if you want to learn more about how to do this, I would recommend you to go to the system, find this step here, step number 7, and read some examples, to pass it, to read these examples and find something that is useful for you. A short overview. First of all, when we're doing measurement, we need to decide on the scale of measurement. What is good, what is bad, where we have green zone, yellow zone. Second, we need to decide if you want to maximize or minimize our metric, our indicator. We want to minimize time to respond, but we want to maximize profits. Then we need to decide, have a specific description about how we're going to get some quantification for this. As a formula would be perfect, or the way to measure something would be perfect. Then we need to decide how we can convert the measure units, like, for example, hours, months, dollars, square meters, how to convert this into something that we can compare with other indicators, I mean in percent, how to calculate the performance. Then we'll need to understand what metrics are more important, that have more weight, and we respectively need to take it into account when calculating the performance. And one thing that you need to be careful about when doing a formal description of the metric is to avoid mixing everything into a single record. Like in this example, improve performance by 5% within 1 year period by expanding into the new market segments. That's a mix of goal, improve performance by 5% target within 1 year period, can be target, can be metric. Performance in this case probably is the metric as well, and by expanding to the new market segments is the action plan. So that's not the best way to define metrics and indicators in the system. In the articles that you have online, it's explained why you should avoid this. And step number 8, which is actually a different framework. You might recognize it. It's a decision framework when you deal with these sectors of urgent, not urgent, important, not important. And that's where you need to think about how you want to deal with the metrics that you have found. If you want to keep them on your scorecard, your operational scorecard, if you want to outsource it to your colleagues, if you want to get rid of these metrics, and finally, if you have a metrics that qualify as a strategic metrics, respectively strategic goals that are changing your approach to the system. Again, for the details, please go to the web page and read about them, and for sure we'll discuss it during this workshop. Step number 9, execution. We need to have some action plan. Step number 10, the impact of the metric. Because when we implement something, we might experience it in some period of time, after a month or two. We test the system and we find out that we are not inducing the results, the actions that we expected we will induce by introduction of this metric. So instead of doing good things, people started doing bad things, and just to keep indicators in a green zone. That's what we want to avoid. Step number 11, the ideas about controlling the cost of measurement and the value of measurement. Obviously, we want to have higher value at lower cost, and one of the solutions to doing so, to having this a very good measurement system at low cost, is to think about measurement beforehand and to design a system that is how we call it, measurable by design. We'll talk about this again during the cases. And finally, automation, because when we do all this, we'll have a good set of metrics, good set of challenges, good set of business goals, business context. The goals and the metrics will be grouped into some categories, and categories will be grouped into another categories. And to calculate all these manually or in some spreadsheet software is not so easy, and that's why you probably need to have a look at some software that will help you to automate this. And that was the step number 12. Now we are ready to start with the challenges, and let's start with the first one, the return of investment. Actually, that was, I think, one of the first questions that we have got. How to measure ROI, how to measure return of investment. Before answering this question in your organization, you need to be specific. Return of investment in what context, in applying to what? I don't have this answer, I don't have this context, so I will give a general answer that will be guiding you when you will be doing it for your organization, for a specific case. First of all, we need to do the step 1 and step 2 of the system. I will go back and show you the steps. So the first step is decomposition, breaking down, and the second step is stakeholders. Okay, so let's talk about the first step. We have total investment. What is investment? The investment in this case is actually very easy to calculate. You just summarize all the spendings that you had during over the period of time that you want to analyze, and that's it. So probably the most challenging part is to analyze the profit. Talking about profit, what we mean by profit. Uh, First of all, of course, it's financial profit, and talking about stakeholders, this financial profit is more interesting for those who own the company, for those who manage this company, so owners of the company, shareholders. But it's not the only profit that you might get. Sometimes you get some profit, and it's not measured in dollars, but still some profit. Yeah. So the value, the profit for the other stakeholders is different. So what other stakeholders do we have? We have clients, we have employees, we have partners. So there are a lot of stakeholders, and we can go ahead with this list. And in their case, the profit, the value is different. And that's what you need to take into account when you start thinking about ROI. Now, I don't have a context, so I cannot go into the details and say, okay, we'll be focusing on the ROI in this context because we don't have the details. But in your case, you will be doing this, and how to do this, we'll talk in other cases. And step number 3 will give us here very interesting results. What we want to why we want to measure ROI in this case, why we want to measure return of investment in this case. First and obvious answer, we want to get some numbers, some absolute numbers, some absolute figures like profit in US dollars and total investment in US dollars. And probably it's the purpose of your measurement. And in this case, you will have some figures by dividing these two numbers. And that's one of the options, but there are a lot of other. For example, if we want to support some of the decisions by analyzing ROI, we don't need to have numbers in US dollars. We just need to know if the ROI of one option is higher than the ROI of another option, and that's it. So sometimes we don't need to have the specific number in US dollars. And when we tell this to our team, we actually change the way that we want to do the rest of the things. We actually change the way that we want to do measurement because it's much easier to measure some estimation than measuring some specific figure. And the cost of measurement in this case is lower. Or, for example, if we formulate the purpose of measurement as I have here, the last one, find out what approach works better. So basically, we're not interested in measuring the profit in money, in dollars. We need to have some estimation of value that we create for some of the stakeholders. And that's another question, how to do this estimation. But again, by answering this question, by being more specific about the purpose of measurement, we can help our team a lot. We can focus the measurement efforts a lot. And that's one of the mental traps that we typically face when we're talking about ROI. People tend to focus on what is easier to measure. And in this case, US dollars is really easy to measure if you can. And for the rest of the measurement, which are actually more difficult to measure, like values that we create for the stakeholders, people say, okay, we can measure profit in US dollars, but we have no idea how to measure the value, so we'll limit our measurement to the profit in US dollars. And that's very short-sighted position for the measurement. So I hope this will be a good starting point for your measurement of ROI. And these 3 questions about what is profit in your case, what stakeholders you have, and what is the purpose of the measurement, what is specific purpose of the measurement, will actually support you a lot in the measuring of return of investment in your case. Now, the next case, it was about productivity of electric company, and the main point here is that we deal with some vertical organization when we have a lot of stakeholders distributed and that have to work together. And the challenge was how to measure the performance in this organization. And to explain this a little bit, I will show the diagram of the electric company, at least as I see it from the perspective of end user, at least as I can see it here in Spain. Probably in your country it's different. So what we have here is that we have customer, and this customer, if I need to have some, if I want to have some electricity, I need to contact some company, some utility company. And when I'm doing this, I have three options, like to go there physically, to make a phone call, which is obviously much more convenient. And another option, I can go to the website of this company, which is much more time saving for me, and to do everything that I need online. So three options. Once my request was received, this request is sent to some technical partner who actually do all physical manipulations. And if needed, this technical partner will visit some apartments, will do some things related to meters, that thing. So basically, that's the idea. And when we're talking about the electric utility company, we need to do a decomposition. We need to understand how this the productivity of the electric utility company is formed, and at the same time we can list some stakeholders. So for the stakeholder customer, we have a productivity perception as a short waiting time. As a customer, I feel that this company is productive if I send them a request, and tomorrow I have technical partner who visit my apartment and doing everything. So that's my perception of productivity. Also, I have some other issues. I want everything to be done quickly, not 2 hours waiting while technical partner is changing everything in my home, but let's say 15 minutes. And I want less visits, because when you call them, they visit you, they forgot something, they return back, they forgot another thing, they return another day. So you spend some time on something that is not actually productive. So that's my perspective, my perception of productivity as a customer. Now, there is a front office, and their perception of productivity is different. They want to have less paperwork, obviously, because that's where the major business is, and they want to have less paperwork. And they want to be able to communicate more efficiently and effectively when they're talking to me as a customer and when they're talking to their technical partner. Of course, they have a lot of more, so we had just at least two for this example. And finally, technical partner. From his perspective, the productivity is when he has less appointments that were failed. He has more information before the visit, so he can prepare his toolkit, he can prepare whatever. And finally, of course, you need to have all the tools available, and that's where his productivity is, the perception of his productivity is. So we have it. And now we need to narrow down the measurement efforts by specifying the purpose of the measurement. What is the purpose of the measurement? I don't know, because we don't have a lot of details, but I will give just my suggestion that the purpose of the measurement to support decisions about process improvements. So front office want to improve some processes, and they need some data to do this. And how to do this? Let's take just a small piece of how we break down the productivity. So one of the pieces into that we have breakdown productivity was less failed appointments. And we can go ahead and we can use all the steps of the system once more. We can start with step 1, asking what is failed appointment. What is failed appointment for the customer? What is failed appointment for the front office? What is failed appointment for the technical partner? So we start once again all the steps, but I will be skipping this obviously as we don't have so much time. I will be focusing on the most challenging things that I believe are challenging in this case. So in this case, we go directly to the step 5. Here we have it, where we have this picture with leading login indicators and bottlenecks. And talking about less failed appointments, thinking about this context, what is the success factor in this case? So obviously, the clients are not bad people, and it's the fail appointments happen not because they want to do some harm to the company, to the utility company. So failed appointments normally happen because the clients were not informed, or they forgot, or they had not got a reminder. So let's call it keep clients informed, some success factor that we can actually convert into some metric. And what is the login indicator in this case? What is the performance result? Actually, the result is that the appointment was failed, and if we want to quantify and measure it, we can use a metric, a percent of failed appointments. So everything is clear, and we can come up with some more metrics, and these metrics will make a lot of sense, but we need to focus our measurement efforts in some way. And how to do this? We need to look at this system, at this problem, less failed appointments, from bird's look, and we need to find the bottlenecks, some constraint that is actually limiting us from improving here. And if we'll do this analysis, we'll find out that we're not really affected by appointments that were cancelled 2 days before the visit. It's not influencing the whole process too much. Normally, we'll find that the most challenging thing that when appointments are cancelled, like last-minute cancellation, or when the technical partner is doing the visit and he cannot enter the apartment because there is no one else in the apartment, no one else waiting for him. So that's the biggest challenge. And having this in mind, we can go ahead. Probably we already have an idea how to change the situation. If not, we can do some kind of observation. If you want to do observation, you need to put on client's shoes, or you probably need to observe depending on the context. In this case, I think it will be enough to talk to the technical partners and find out why the appointment is normally failed. And we can also talk to some clients to find out why the appointment was failed. We can pick some clients randomly. We can do some clients that have recently had a cancel appointment. We can do a lot of things in this context. Okay, so we did observation. And what we can do then? First of all, we can classify these metrics a little bit. We can put a high weight, high important, relevant important value on those metrics that will be more influential for the purpose of measurement. And probably in this case, this will be the metric related to last-minute cancellation. So that's what we need to measure, not just the percent of failed appointments. We need to be a little more specific. We need to measure the percentage of last-minute cancellation. Yes, it's a different measure, more specific. Then, if going through the steps of the system, we have this nice diagram, and the metric for last-minute cancellation will go into this sector, important, urgent. But let's think if we can put something into this structure, important and not urgent. So we have to put here some strategic goal that would probably change the situation. So instead of doing things better, we'll be doing better things. And in this case, it's probably the solution is probably to promote the idea of having electric meter outside of the apartments. If the electric meter is outside of the apartments, it's very comfortable for everyone. Technical partner can enter whatever time he needs, and you don't have to be at home when someone is doing the revision. And that's the point. For example, in Spain, we have a lot of electric meters that can that send data over wireless networks, so no one have to enter your apartment to check the data, because the electric meter will send this data wirelessly. Finally, point 9, action plan. So we have the idea that our problem is a last minute cancellation, and we know how to measure it. We can take a scale, let's say last minute, so what it is 2 hours before the visit, and now we know how to measure it, but how to change it, how to influence it. On the previous step, it was 6.1. Hopefully we have generated some ideas. We observed the situation, we talked to clients, we talked to partners, hopefully got some idea about what can be improved. So probably someone told us, okay, I would never skip this appointment if I had a SMS like 1 day before. SMS message to my smartphone. Okay, it works. Probably we can also do some bonuses or some penalization for the cases of non-show. And it's not necessary, penalization is normally a negative, has a negative impact on the relationship with the customer. But if you will promote it as a having bonus and not having bonus, then it will be a little bit different things, and people will be interested in participating. Finally, the impact. That's an interesting question. So imagine that you have introduced some action plan, and you have introduced some metrics like last minute cancellation. And after a short period of time, 1 month, 2 months, depends, you need to go and check the real behavior of that system. Because if you have introduced some metric, it's not necessary that people will be actually following your ideas. Probably you have introduced a metric of let's say, let's keep the last minute cancellation lower, and instead of trying to engage more with the customers, probably your technical partners will try to manage lower density of the appointments. And that's not what you want. You want to be more efficient and effective, not just improve the indicator by decreasing the initial input. So that's the idea of the control and the impact. You need to that's what we have on this screenshot. You need to think about how this metric, did it move your organization into the right direction, the green arrow, or it moved your organization to some unexpected behavior, the red arrow. So that's the idea. Now, the next case is about non-revenue water. If you're not familiar with this term, I was not, so I had to find the definition for this term, and just this definition from Wikipedia. So basically, it's another question related to utility company in the water that is lost due to some challenges. And I like this case really much because actually it's very simple and very effective way to show some of the ideas. Let's do decomposition. From the definition, we can say that NRW, non-revenue water, is something some situation when we lost water because of physical leaks, because of theft, because of metering inaccuracies. Stakeholders, water production company, vendors of water meters, specialists who do infrastructure work, specialists who work for service providers, customers, of course. We can go ahead more with profiling these customers, like into the households, commercials, and so on and so forth. Illegal customers, of course. The context of measurement. Why do we want to measure non-revenue water in one context? It depends. If we want to measure it in a developing country, it's one aspect. If you want to develop it in Europe, it's a different story. And if we want to develop some prevention plan, it's one thing. So we need to decide the context of measurement. In your case, it might be very specific, very specific goal of the measurement. And if you can go with this goal, probably you will focus your measurement efforts very well. So that's the idea. Now, how to measure non-revenue water? So there is some water that water utility companies send into households, and how to find out how much is lost. So actually, it's very simple. You have some meter in the beginning, let's say in the sector, that can track the volume of the water that passed through this sector. And you also have some smaller meters for each household. So that's where the mathematics starts. So you have A in the beginning, and the sum of all consumptions of the water should be equal to A. And if it's not, you have the number for non-revenue water. That's actually, I like this case a lot. In many businesses, you can make the measurement system as simple as this. You can put what will be a meter in your case in the beginning, and you can put meter on the specific units of your business. And by doing the sum, you will see how the whatever in your case water is. Probably it's money, probably it's value, probably it's attention of the customers, whatever. You can see how it was lost or was not. Now, we can go ahead more with the steps of the system to see how this is actually, how we can do the measurement even better. First of all, talking about this context, develop prevention plan to control non-revenue water, we can say that we want to have some scale and measurement scale. And on this scale, we can have some benchmark, which in this case will be some data from other region. By having this data, we can actually do some very rough, very quick analysis. If in region A, we have a non-revenue water, let's say if we lose 5% of water, and in region B we lose 7% of water, then probably statistically we can say that we're losing more in region B, and we should go and search for the reason. By doing this short analysis, we already have a quick answer to the question. Yes, there is a problem, and it's in many cases it's just where we want to start. Again, strategic goal. What can be a strategic goal in this case? We have no idea, but we have a list of stakeholders. So we can go to the stakeholders and ask, for example, vendors of the meters, guys, can you develop us something that could prevent, let's say, could prevent some illegal use of water? And how, if it happens, how are we going to detect this? So another goal that you need to have in mind, and probably is one of the goals of the vendors of these meters. Statistic analysis. In the example in the 12-step system, we're talking about cases when people were able to detect something by the absence of something. Like in the case of Shark Holmes, Holmes was able to solve the case because of the dog was not barking. So he assumes that the evildoer in this case was familiar to this dog. So that's why the dog was not barking. Absence of barking dog. Scientists were able to find the black holes by the absence of solar light, by the light of coming from certain stars. So that's the idea. And sometimes you need to look at your system and ask yourself, can we get some insights by analyzing and finding the absence of something? In the case of non-revenue water, probably the absence of some peaks, some consuming peaks, will lead you to the conclusion that some illegal uses of the water is happening in this region and this apartment. Of course, there might be some specific actions that you can do, and as far as I learned from the source that I quote below, there is a method called acoustic leak detection that helps to find out where the problem is, and that's the purpose of the system. It will not tell you that to measure non-revenue water in this very case you need to use acoustic leak detection. No, it will tell you the opposite thing. Okay, you have step 6.2 where I suggest you to look for the ways to do control experiments, when you need to talk to the stakeholders, to probably the professionals in this case, and ask them, okay, if we have this problem, how we can do the experiments and how we can understand if we can measure what we want to measure in this case. An action plan, again, this source that also suggested that the pressure measurement is one of the effective actions plan for controlling non-revenue water. So it's not about finding the specific measure. The purpose of the system, the purpose of 12-step KPI system for challenging KPIs, is to help you to start the discussion, to lead your discussion in your team about the ways to not just to measure things, but actually to control them. Next case, it's about training. Actually, we had several questions about how to measure training, and it was really interesting. And actually, we had some materials. And if you want to have a full story about what I'm going to talk about, you need to go to our website. There is an article about how to measure training. Training effectiveness, and in the end of the article you will have a link to the project of BC Designer Online. I have it here. So if you need to have some specific training KPIs, you just open this project with the KPIs, and you already have them. A lot of it's a ready-to-use model to measure the effectiveness of any training, and how to use it, how to build a similar one, how to change it according to your needs. You need to read this article for this purpose. So you have some good materials to go ahead. And just a few words about how to approach this problem. The step number 1 and step number 2, you need to do a decomposition. And there are different ways to do the decomposition. Basically, we need to answer the question what training is, what a good training is. And there is one popular model called our Kirkpatrick model, levels model. And basically it tells us that we need to divide the training. We need to think about the training from 4 perspectives. One, level 1 reaction, how engaging the training was. And talking about stakeholders, here we have stakeholders like trainer, students, probably training system, the organization. Step number 2, level number 2, learning. If new knowledge were obtained. In this case, we talk about stakeholders that we have on the step 1, plus probably here we deal with some knowledge-based system. Level 3, behavior, how the training changed their behavioral patterns. All the stakeholders plus the stakeholders, the business system stakeholders. And finally, level 4, impact, how this training impacted on the business performance. And he have another stakeholder, which is another system, the strategy execution system. So having these 4 levels, we can talk about any training. So we can use these 4 levels to analyze any training. And obviously, when we will be moving from point 1 to point 4, we will be facing more challenging task of measurement. So it's easy to measure how engaging the training was. You can just ask people to can use your smartphone, put their like positive smile, negative smile, and you can ask people to press one of the buttons. Easy to use engagement. Measuring knowledge is more trickier. Measuring the behavior patterns is should be done in a longer horizon, and it's more challenging. And impact on the business performance is even more challenging. But in that article that you have a link in the beginning, we explain how we can approach to this problem. And don't forget about step 3, the purpose of the measurement. When you will be clear about the purpose of the measurement, you can make your measurement efforts much more focused. So you can, let's say, if you are the challenge is to select the trainer for a future training, you probably need to focus on certain aspects. If the purpose is to select a training program, you need to focus on the aspects related to alignment with business challenges, and so on and so forth. And for example, if your challenge is to improve training efficiency, then you need to go to the system, and you need to go to this step when we had to look at the we have it here. When you had to look at the bottlenecks, when you had to look at leading and lagging factors, at the success factors and the valuable results. So when you decide about the purpose of the measurement, you can actually focus your measurement effort a lot. And as for the rest of the steps, you can go to the system and pass through the steps for your domain, for your very domain. And one thing that in the comments for this video, you have a links to all the materials that I talk about. So all the links that you see on the screen, they are actually in the listed in the description for this workshop. Now, a similar question was about measuring the performance for the university's public section education and so on and so forth. The question was formulated as, can KPIs be used in universities to evaluate teachers' work? And actually, the question is yes, and I can prove it because we have clients from these sectors. And just to name a few, Huanzhong University of Science and Technology in China, University of Mexico, some educational organization in Saudi Arabia. We have some clients from K-12 programs from the United States, from Canada, and the list goes on. And actually, these are the users of BC Designer software. So we can absolutely confirm that KPIs can be used for the universities, in the universities to evaluate teachers' work. And now some nuances about how to do this. So basically, speaking about education, we can say it's very similar to training. We can use the same Kirkpatrick's model with 4 levels to do this. But what's the difference? And actually, there is some important aspects that we need to take into account. First of all, we have some additional stakeholders, and they're very important. These are some regulators, some official regulators. So probably when I'm doing trainings about KPIs, about balanced scorecard, I am focused on delivering the value, and I'm not limited by a certain program that is restricting me from talking about certain things, or is telling me what my program should be. So I'm free to compile my product myself. And normally, teachers in the universities don't have this luxury, and that's why we need to take into account another stakeholder, like regulator. Now, there is a additional stakeholder which we call student, very similar to student during the training, but in this case, we're talking about someone who is whose priorities might change a lot in short term and long term. So we need to have it into the account. So probably some students are oriented on getting a better job in future, and some students are less oriented on this. And that's where that's what is influencing the measurement system as well. When I was doing research about this, I found the article and the title catch my attention. The only metric that matters in EdTech, students overcome. So you can find it at Forbes. And basically that's true. So we can measure a lot of things, but the bottom line is if the outcomes of the students are good or bad. The problem is that the outcomes of the students are lagging indicator. And another problem that there are some official regulators that want educational professionals to measure some other things. So probably that's where you want your system to be focused on, to measuring the outcomes for the students, the value for the students, but you need to take into account other things. In this system, is a 12-step KPI system, we're talking about some success factors. And in the case of specific teacher, we can name a lot of them. And I have no idea what these success factors will be in your case. So it's about doing what was on other step. It's about doing control experiments. It's about seeing, understanding, analyzing what scientists do. And there is one universal success factor, which is a discipline. So if you want to make sure that things happen in your education organization, make sure that you know what discipline is. You have agreement about what discipline is, and you know how to measure it. How to do this? You go to the system, to step one, do a decomposition for discipline in your case, do the list of stakeholders, do the purpose of measurement, and you go ahead with this. So this is one of the metrics that you might have in your scorecard. As a leading one, that's important because normally we can find a lot of login metrics, but finding leading metrics is more difficult task. Typical problems that we see for educational professionals is that in many cases, there is a confusion between activities and expected results. So sometimes people do the tests and use the results of this test, like let's say test coverage, the number of persons who participated in this test as an indicator of something. It's not indicator. And even test score is not always the best indicator, because it's sometimes it's more related to the activity, not to the actual expected output. And that's what you need to think a lot about, how you can actually measure the value delivered. Sometimes it's not just about doing a test. Bottlenecks. Imagine some educational organization, and what is preventing you? Ask your teachers, what is preventing them from being more effective, from delivering high value to their students? What is limiting them? And skip the overall thing like money. Yeah. So imagine that you want to think about something different. What is stopping you from doing this? And you will hear a lot of interesting ideas. Like someone will say that, okay, I would do a lot of more, but the discipline is not that good. Or I would do a lot of more, but I don't have enough materials. I would do a lot of more, but I don't have freedom to go out and to do classes in the nature. So a lot of things to talk about, and those might be the performance bottlenecks. Might be, not necessary. So you need to find them, you need to analyze them, you need to later probably quantify them to test if it's actually the bottleneck, the performance bottleneck, give someone a freedom to try their ideas, if it works, if it doesn't. So that's the approach that should be done. And the first step is finding bottlenecks. What's the impact? When you do implement some new metric, as we mentioned before, you're not necessarily getting the results that you expected to have. For example, you might want to set a metric that an average test score in a class should be 80%, whatever scale you use, depending on the country. And what you expected teachers to do is to be more productive and to be able to teach more, to improve the learning skills of people, of students. But what might happen is that teachers might change the questions of the test, might make them easier, might trick the system. So that's what you want to look at, because even the best metrics can be gamed, and it's not about the metrics, it's about people. So involve people when you design the metrics. Don't just do a top to bottom translation of your metrics. Involve people, and that's the point. Do the discussion. Action plan. Here are two suggestions for educational organization. First of all, in many organizations that we worked with, they had some very long feedback loop. What does it mean? It means that the indicators were studied on a very long period of time. For example, once a year. And it's too late to do some corrective actions once a year. It's too late. You cannot tell to the teachers that, last year you did this and the next year try to do this. So we don't have so much time. Try to make the feedback loop shorter. And to do this, you will obviously need to find some metrics that are easier to measure, that they don't have a high cost of measurement, but have a high value of measurement. And another thing that typically happens in educational organization is that they mix together all the metrics. I mean, the metrics related to the education with the metrics related to some business aspects like managing suppliers, payroll, human resource, and so on and so forth. It makes sense to align them. For example, if the management, the direction of the university think that the problem of low performance in some aspect, like in physics, is because of the talent management in your university is not able to find a good teacher, then you can align these two metrics. But normally the metrics for these business things should be on separate scorecard. They can be linked to other scorecards, but you need to understand that you have like different systems. There are systems that teach people, and you have some other supporting systems, and you need to be able, not necessarily to do it all the time, but you need to be able to look at them separately. So when you have a final score for your university, that's good. That's good for one of the stakeholders, for official regulator. But for your internal use, you need to have some separate scorecards for business aspects, for teaching aspects, for probably specific tutors, probably even for specific courses. So that's another idea. In the system, we have step 11, where we talk about the cost and the value of the measurement. And one of the ways to significantly reduce the cost of the measurement is to make things measurable by design. In this case, when doing something, you need to think about how we're going to measure this. So that's what we mean by measurement by design. For example, let's take some typical test. And when this test was done, you can check out the most typical failures that you have, the questions that were not answered by most of the persons. What does it mean? It means that well, different things. All those students were not able to understand this. All the students were not to remember these things, or the teacher was using some wrong approach to explaining this. So actually, that's an example of how one can implement a shorter feedback loop. In this case, it will be just several hours, and in this case, that's how you can implement something in your system to analyze and improve teachers' work. So you don't need to be you don't need to track in some, I don't know what way, the performance of the teacher afterwards and after in the end of the year. It's too long. It's too hard to do. Instead, you can implement something into the very system, for example, like this example, a question level analysis, and it will lead you to some interesting insights about how the system can be improved. And talking about measurement horizon, I mentioned it already. Another thing that you might take into account is to, if we're talking about the value for the students, the outcomes of the students, is to make the horizon wider, and you can analyze the employment of the students after the university, and that's actually very motivating for anyone involved. So that's what we had for universities, and the next question will be measuring the benefits of leadership training. So we have discussed the training aspect, but what about some really, really soft skill like leadership? A few things to think about in this context. First of all, why? I would start with the step number 3. Why do you want to measure this? Why do you want to measure the benefits of leadership training? The answer is that we want to have some number, like to measure, understand the benefit of leadership training. That's good, but I would prefer if you can give me some more specific reason. And in this case, it would be to support some goal, some decision that, for example, you want to decide if you should send your managers to some leadership training, or if you want to repeat leadership training that you did before, or if some of your employees have already visited leadership training, you want to validate the results of this training in the context of the performance improvement. So if you choose one of the answers, it would focus your measurement. Stakeholders, managers, those who are supposed to be leaders, employees, trainer, the list goes on. Leadership. What is leadership? And actually, with these terms, there is a very big problem. There is no agreement about this term, and it's actually really hard to give a correct answer about the leadership in the historical context. If you mention the name of Napoleon, there is no agreement if that historical person has some leadership skills, or it was just about management skills or whatever. So I'm not telling you that you need to define leadership term for everyone, but at least you can define it for your organization. And be specific when you do so. When we're talking about leadership, we also are at risk of one of the mental traps that we mentioned, 4.3, focusing on something that is easy to measure but has low value. In this case, it's about doing some surveys, asking your employees. So someone were to the leadership training, and you ask those employees, how do you like it? And everyone rate the training as A++. Okay, so that's easy, but not really effective. Observation. This is a more difficult approach, but you might want to use it. You might want to, first of all, observe how those people who pass the training changing in their behavior, if you can actually see this change. And of course, you can visit some training before doing the training for the rest of the company and see how it works for the audience. So this obviously will cost more, but the results of measurement, your expert opinion about the benefit of the leadership training will be better. So when you ask how to measure the benefit of leadership training, it's not necessary that there is an easy to do answer. It's not necessary that there are some metrics that you can take and use. Yeah, you can do this, but the value of this measurement will be not that high. So use the steps of the system and go ahead, pretend you're a scientist and you're doing observation, you're doing experiments. So that's what can be done. Now, the concept of measurement by design, and the question is how we can change the system to make it measurable by design. So if we want, if we're considering within some leadership training, we can go to the trainer and ask him or her this question: how would you formulate and quantify the benefits of the training? And in this case, we can start some productive discussion even before the training. And you can start asking the questions like, okay, so we'll be sending 5 of our employees to your leadership training, and what can we expect? How we can justify the spending? And this might be a very productive discussion. The trainer might point you to the very specific skills that might be trained, and the trainer actually might define what is his or her perception of leadership. And probably it can be formulated like this. So during the training, we'll be talking about 10 typical aspects of leaders' behavior patterns. And when we can formulate, when we can decompose a WAG idea of leadership into these 10 behavioral patterns, we can actually make the idea of a leadership a little bit more testable and a little bit more measurable. Go ahead. The next case is sustainability. What it is. We had one of the articles on our website. It's about Balance Scorecard, Sustainability Balance Scorecard. And you can go ahead into the details, read these details in this article. Now, basically, the idea that we have, we add, if we're talking about the balance scorecard, the suggestion was to add 2 more perspectives to the balance scorecard, the society and environment. And basically, it adds 2 stakeholders to the discussions that we run around measurement. Now, the sustainability means different things for different organizations, actually. And again, with the leadership, it's a good idea to define it in your very case. So if we're talking about CO2 footprint, if we're talking about some usage of some resources, of some energy, if we're talking about certain interaction with society, so that's what you need to think about. Additional stakeholders that I mentioned, and the context of measurement, why you should measure this. It's very interesting in this case. If you want to have an example of how to deal with sustainability, I do recommend for you to check the article that we have. It's called "A Strategy Scorecard and KPIs for Energy Production Company." And basically what we have found out during the, I think I have it here. Yeah. What we have found out during the research for this article is that a lot of companies, not just from energy sector, are using these ideas, using these approaches. So I have an explanation about some general strategy, and for sure you have some link to BC Designer Online, to example BC Designer Online, where you can find some specific indicators for sustainability, some strategy map. And by the way, for the previous case for leadership, on our website you can find this article, which is called 8 Metrics to Evaluate Entrepreneurial and Management Skills. It's not the same as leadership, but have a look at this article. There are some metrics, some really interesting insights that you can use to quantify, including leadership skills. And as always, in the end of the article, you have a link to example project. And in this link, you can find out these metrics that you can use. Okay. So the next question, metric for culture. And talking about culture, the question was formulated in this way. So I will read it. We run an aged care facility which incorporates about 220 residents across a mix of living, independent, and care, plus 120 staff. How can we get a cultural organization metric measuring the resident-focused nature of our business and our staff and attitude and care? That's really good question because sooner or later we need to face the problem of measuring the culture. And what is the culture? Culture is a set of behavioral patterns. Patterns. That's simple. If you want to go for more complicated definition of culture, you can do. But I think for the sake of this discussion, it makes sense to use this definition. And stakeholders. As far as I understand the context of the question, we're talking about residents, people who live are the clients of this organization. There are, of course, staff, like we can think about nurses, administrative staff, technical staff. Of course, there are families of the residents, probably some governmental regulators. Now, we have a definition of culture, so it's a set of behavioral patterns. Now, what a good culture is, what are the good behavioral patterns? And it's hard to define it with the details, but we can say that a good behavioral pattern is one staff cares about residents' health. Cares about. And what does it mean when staff cares about someone? Again, we can take different stakeholders and we can analyze this. But here are some suggestions that you might use in similar situations and in this organization. When staff care about, they do report about minor health incidents. Minor health incidents. So if something happened, they do report about this. If something was about happening, they report about this. And when they had some dangerous situation, or they had a possibility of this situation, they start thinking about how to prevent it in future. So we can go into more details here, but that's actually a very framing answer to the question: what does it mean when someone is caring about a person? I mean, on the physical level, we can go ahead with more details for the, let's say, mental level, but that's a good starting point for now that I will use as example. And what does it mean for the management? How to support this culture? First of all, the management is a different stakeholder. So the management, what does it mean when management cares about residents' health? It means that in some way they're rewarding the behavior that they want to have more. So they're rewarding this caring behavior. They also do some root cause analysis. Um, they're trying to understand if something happens. They're trying to work on the prevention plan as well. They're trying to understand why this happened. And they also need to pay attention to the small details. So that's the overview of of the direction where we want to move. And that's a good question to ask to nurses and to some technical people. So you guys want to care more, and what's limiting you from caring more? And you will hear a lot of interesting insights here. Normally, it's a paper that people hate because it takes too much time and they don't see how it's helping people. So if that's the case, most likely it is. Try to measure it. Try to understand where people lose their time on paperwork and try to reduce it. So you have here a measurement, you have an action plan. That's how you can get even more insights. So sometimes you cannot just come up with good measurement initiatives. You don't have enough experience to come up to guess what people think about. So the only thing you can do is to just sit and wait and see what's happening. So you do observation, and you see small things, trying to capture the essence of these things and trying to change them. And finally, you're in danger, because if you ask your employees to report about even minor health incidents, then what do you think will happen? It depends on how you organize it. So if you tell them, okay, the more reports I will have, the higher will be your bonus in the end of the month. And believe me, in the end of the month, you will have a lot of reports about accidents, even small accidents, and some pre-incident situation. That's how you need to promote it. And if you do the opposite thing, if you tell, okay, we're going to measure your performance on this pre-incident metric, and let's keep it in the green zone. The behaviors that you will induce will be different. It will be opposite one. So be careful with this. I'm not telling you that you need to pay everyone bonus for for reporting 100 plus incidents. You don't need to do this all the time. Probably you need to do this first month. It's not necessary to do this in a physical way to compensate people with the money. Sometimes it's enough just to make some competitive situation when you have two teams, and the team that reports more pre-incidents is winning. And how to use this incidents? You will just count the number of these pre-incidents in the end, and the whole purpose is that by doing this, people will start improve, and you will be able to come up with improvement plan. You will be able to measure this. And as I mentioned, the measurement here is not that important. What is important is that by following this logic, you already induce the right behavior. That's what you want in the end. And again, there is one article that we have on our website. It's about metrics for culture. It's not specifically for the culture in healthcare, but it's about using measuring the culture itself. And we have some nice infographics that explains our approach to measuring the culture. Some recommendations. You can pass through this article, read it. And I think it will be interesting for those who are on this level, when the challenge is to understand where the culture is and how to change it to something that we need. Now, another question was how to validate data that was obtained or entered manually. My understanding of this question is that there was some data entered into the system, and it was entered incorrectly, on purpose, or accidentally. It's not my understanding of the question. Actually, it's my assumption that I want to focus on to answer this question. And let's deal with this situation. Let's see how we can manage it. So we do steps 1, 2, 3, talking about what is to define the subject of measurement, to define stakeholders, to define the context, so on and so forth. And I think we can get directly to step 5.1. And that's where we need to think about the difference between activities and results. Because validating activities is normally easier than validating, let's say, faking activities. It's easier than faking the results. So you can tell that you have contacted 1,000 prospect clients, but you cannot lie about the number of closed deals. So the activity, contacting prospect clients, and the result, closing deals. When you shift your measurement effort from the activities to the results, you're increasing the protection of your system. You're increasing the level of validation by default. Now, we can validate mathematically. let's say we have some leading and lagging indicators, like number of leads for marketing. Number of leads is a leading indicator, and number of sales is lagging indicator. And we can also have some conversion rate, some historical conversion rate for this context. That's why we can actually validate the job done. That's how we can validate it. So imagine that we have the number of leads, let's say 10,000 leads. We have certain conversion rate, but the result is 0 or result is too low. That's how we validated the result. Yeah. Or the opposite situation. We had some sales. Let's say we have 2 sales, and we want to validate this number, and we use a conversion rate in the opposite direction to get an estimation for the value of leading indicator. So if we had 2 closed deals, then probably we have something like 2,000 prospects, for example. That's the way to validate this, to validate indicators mathematically, because we always need to think about 2 sides of the coin. We need to think about leading indicators and lagging indicators. Having known this and known conversion rate, we can validate the opposite side. And finally, we can use a pair of performance and quality indicator. Here's an example. It's actually not a real example, but the idea was captured. It's about the translation of the software, for example, the BC Designer software, into some language that no one speaks in the company, into Chinese in this case. So have a look at the original and the translation. And without knowing Chinese, it's hard to validate this result, but we can do some technical thing. We can pay attention to this technical data that we have here. So by reviewing the translation and the original, I can say that the parameter, this %s, and the quotation marks and the other marks were translated correctly. And that's a way to validate the translation. Now I can say with certain level of probability that the translation was done correctly. But I can also do the opposite thing, because according to my experience, if you do the translation of 2,000 lines, you will obviously do some mistakes, especially in these cases. These mistakes that can be easier validated. If there are no mistakes, then I will have a suspicion that this translation was not done by human, but it was done by machine. And that's a way to validate it. In this case, we have the performance indicators, like in this case, let's say the number of translated lines. But we also can come up with some quality indicator, like the number of mistakes. And obviously, the target value for the number of mistakes, especially in the first interaction, will not be 0. Because if I have 0 of the mistakes that I can validate, like in this case, then it's a sign that it was a machine translation. So probably I need to have some mistakes to be confident about that some human was working on this. So just an example. And to learn more about this, you can search on our website an article that is called that is about gaming indicators. So just over here, and you will find KPIs misuse, why does it happen, and how to avoid it. So that article will be really relevant in the topic of this question. Okay. Now, again, this example actually shows what we have explained in step 6, when in astronomy people discovered something like black holes by observation, and they observed that something didn't appear, like there was no light. Like in this case, if there is a translation without mistakes that I can validate, then probably it's a machine translation. And One thing that you can do, we had a step 10, which was formulated as, let me open it. It was the impact. What behavior do your indicators induce? And that's what you can implement, and you can actually easily implement. You need to think about, if you want to validate the data easily, you need to think about the questions that can be answered only by the person who did the job, who did the homework. For example, imagine the situation when someone tells you, okay, you will have a money back to your bank card. And you can talk a lot about, if you have got it, if you didn't have got it, if there is some technical problem, if not. But you can ask a question to this person. You can ask this person to provide you with reference number and the date when the refund was made. And if you do this, you actually asking this person to go into the database to check it out and to see this number, because this person cannot generate some random number. Obviously, you will find out that it was random number. It was this person was lying. So if this person is doing his job at certain level, you will make this person to log into some database to check out the data for you, and that's probably the best way to validate any data. When you do this, you can pick some random question that will make this person to do his homework. That approach, it's not easy to implement, but sometimes you need to do this. Now, talking about the cost and the value of the measurement in this case. Before validating any data, we need to think about what's the value of this data for the business. If the value of the data is lower, then we can work only with low cost control tools. If the value of this data is high, we can employ some more specific tools with a higher cost and higher precision level, and we can do the validation more often. Just to have some example, if we're talking about, let's say, validation absence rate data, it's important, but it's not so critical. So probably the system will be something related to using some cards and not scanner of your eye. But if we're talking about some spendings in your company, then the validation system should be more specific and more precise. So that's the rules that you need to use when you think about how to validate the data. Again, you can validate by using performance and quality indicators. You can validate by using a pair of leading and lagging indicators. And that's where you start this brainstorming about the data validation. Finally, it always makes sense to make system measurable by design. So let's say we have some person who did phone calls and entered some data into the CRM system. We can validate this data. We can validate this data by randomly picking some call recording and checking it out if the data is correct. You don't need to check all the records. You just need to pick one and to see if it was correct or not. It's like if someone is doing customer support for you, you don't need to control all the tickets that this person is answering. You just need to pick randomly a few of them and validate the answer. That's it. That's simple. The same example can be applied to the previous example of electric utility company. And that's actually what many companies here in Spain did. Instead of entering data from the meter manually, when a customer had to write something into the papers that you have in entrance to your home, you can just take a picture of the meter and send it to the server of this electric company. So it's not just easier to do for many people who have a smartphone, but it's also a different way to validate data. Of course, there are people who can Photoshop this picture, but the point is that in this case, they have chosen the appropriate tool for the appropriate with appropriate cost of measurement and appropriate for the value that is measured. So these are the ideas. Now, the next case is multi-client standardization. So my understanding of this case, of this question, was that the data is generated by many clients. And the challenge is to aggregate in some way this data into some performance indicator. For example, customers suggest various ideas about product quality. The challenge is to aggregate this data in some way. If I was not right about if that's not what the author of this question meant, please share your more specific question in the comments, so I will be able to answer it. So what we are measuring in this case, we need to be more specific. Like if we're measuring product quality, we need to define what it is. Now, stakeholders aspect. I would start with sorting out stakeholders. We need to decide what stakeholders we have here. Obviously, we have clients, but we need to differentiate prospect clients and paying clients and some high value clients. So we need to use Pareto principle to be able to understand what we are looking for. The purpose of measurement, we need to do this. Mental traps. Again, when we aggregating data, we're at risk to get some number, but this number will not make any sense. Like it doesn't make sense to get aggregated data from the customers who are not paying. At least if you're not looking for the ways to improve the relationship with those customers to make them paying customers. So that's why you need to have a context. Defined. And again, another mental trap is it's easier to we focus on what is easier to measure, but we forgot about some high value metrics that are hard to measure. It's hard to give any other recommendation without seeing more details. So I would start this. I would approach this problem using these steps: profiling customers, understanding why you measure, what you measure, and trying to avoid metrics that are not aligned with your context, with your goals. So that's a general framework, and more details will lead to more suggestions. The next case, understanding what KPIs each department should be tracking that will support in improvement OTIF performance. OTIF, on time in full. It's a metric used in supply chain. Stakeholders. I would divide the stakeholders in this case on those that influencing this indicator directly, logistic managers, truck drivers, whatever, and indirectly like HR, marketing, training. So it makes sense to do so. The next question is, how can each stakeholder influence this indicator? And let's take something less obvious. So it's easy to understand how a logistic manager or truck driver can influence this indicator. But what about HR, for example? Ask this question to HR. How can you help us improve on time and full performance? So you're working with people, so you need to find, hire, train people who are better fit for the job. And what do you think is the best match? And how to find this person? And what are key success factors of training that person, the person who will be able to do the job successfully? If your HR is not able to answer these questions, probably you're not working with the best HR. If they have got the answers, then you can convert them into some metrics, and you can decide if you want to use them. Just an example, Apple company, we reviewed this in one of the cases on our website. They had a high turnover rate. I mean, the turnover rate for the people who work in the company. And that was done on purpose, because in this case, the company is able to filter a lot of talents and to find the best talents for the company. Bottlenecks. How the bottlenecks can be defined in this case, because that's normally the easiest and the fastest way to formulate good metrics. If you have some delivery problems, if you have some logistic problems, what are the reasons? What is limiting you from this? For example, if we're talking about the delivery, I mean, not the physical delivery, but the delivery of some software product, one of the reasons of the problems with delivering on time and in full is that interaction are too large. It's planned for months, not for days, not for weeks. Change it. Dealing with unknown. Put yourself in the client's shoes. So imagine you're a client and you're working with this. What can be improved? Strategic goal. If thinking about the logistics system, what can be changed? So if we're trying to optimize, how we can optimize this system. For example, if we're talking about classical logistics system like delivery or something, sometimes it's not about making it easier for the drivers of the trucks to get to the clients, but it's about changing the way the drivers of the truck deliver the items. Probably they can leave it in the lockers that are located near the apartment, and that's more beneficial for the truck driver, because it's really fast, no need to contact customer directly. And for the customer, the item can be delivered at any time when this customer is at work and not able to accept this package, this delivery. So strategic goal. Okay, so quick overview of other questions. We are in IT consulting that with products such as software, corporate training, and solution. How do we set our KPIs? I think we have discussed it in the details. So start with step 2, stakeholders. Focus on the value for them, as we did before in the previous cases, and a repeat process for different areas. As we did it for the training, you had it for the training. The same way you can do it for the software, for the quality, whatever. So that's the approach, and the rest is just applying your experience to this. Objective-based rating system. The good starting point for this question is to answer a question: why do you need to have this system? What answers you want to have? And if you want to use this objective-based rating system to induce some behaviors, and what kind of behavior you want to induce, because it's not always the question of getting some rating. It's always the question how this rating will affect other employees in your company. So that's the starting point. And if you have more questions, you can look at the example of the case study about culture to learn more about it. Finding output measurement for the balanced scorecard. Actually, on step 3, the context, you're supposed to discuss some goals that stand behind your measurement efforts. So these goals, if they are big enough, they will be on your balanced scorecard, and respectively, the measurements found using the system will be aligned with these goals. So that's how you build the measurements for your balanced scorecard. Nothing special about this. Short question: sales. In this case, I would recommend to go to our website. There is an article, 3 sales lawyers. You have it here. You have some explanation about how to measure it. It's obviously not one level. It's at least 3 levels or more. And in the end, you also have a link to the project with the sales indicators. that you can use as a starting point when designing your own system for measuring sales performance in your company. So you have all the indicators and you can start using them. Okay. Next question: how to measure and increase efficiency? Again, as far as this question is formulated, I would suggest to define what efficiency is and what stakeholders you deal with. Once you're clear about these answers, you can go ahead and we can talk more about how to measure and increase it. Does it bring value to the business? Does the measurement brings value to the business? Again, as far as this question is formulated, I would suggest to talk with your team and to discuss what you mean by it in this case. So it's some specific items, some specific objects that you want, some specific project, some specific system. And you need to do the same for the value. You need to decide about your stakeholders and find out how the value for those stakeholders is created. Of course, you need to do all this in your specific context. We are a state-owned company responsible for implementing government's infrastructure projects, highways, bridges, etc. The most challenging KPI for us would be ROI, return of investment, as we need to balance profitability with value for money. I think a lot of ideas were discussed in the beginning when we talked about the ROI, return of investment, and that's how the further thinking, further discussion of the process can be framed. And as for specific indicators, it depends a lot on how you will formulate, how you will answer all the questions about the purpose of measurement, the stakeholders, how you will decompose the process. And obviously, your indicators for return of investment will not be the same as even the indicators for return of investment in a very similar company. You will have a different indicators. Release calendar maintains a critical patch update metric KPI. I've got this question, I think, yesterday, and I was not able to confirm the specific meaning of the question. So I suggest to contact the author with us and to discuss it once more. As far as I can see it right now, the challenge is to put necessary numbers and just to calculate them. So I cannot detect the challenge here. So probably I just don't have enough details. How do you identify KPIs for software developers in an organization? It is difficult to set targets as one project or upgrade or bug resolution may take much longer or shorter than expected. Further, the impact of their work is depend on other departments who deploy and support their software. So I actually use some bold font here to underline some ideas, but that's how the question was asked. And well, my answer is that the first part is that it's difficult to set targets. When it's difficult to set targets, use a universal one. The universal one is that you need to create the value for the stakeholders, for the end users, or well, generally speaking, for the stakeholders. That's how to set a good target, and that's a starting point for discussion about the target. Now, about the decomposition. And let's take one, which is bug resolution. From the viewpoint of different stakeholders, what bug resolution is. From the viewpoint of user, a bug resolution is a bug when something is resolved quickly. From the viewpoint of engineer, the challenge is to find the problem of this bug. Why we have this bug? How to prevent this bug in future? And from the viewpoint of tester is to how to change the test model to make this case testable. In the viewpoint of shareholders, if this bug was actually critical, if the some big buyer decided not to buy because of this bug. So that's how you can decompose it. And here I would recommend to avoid one typical mental trap that we have under the number 4.3. When you're focusing on something that is easier to measure, and normally people in this case, software companies, trying to measure the bug resolution as a time to resolve something because it's easier to measure. Yeah, and it makes sense to measure it, but you already also have some other stakeholders, and in that case, you need to think about other measures. Like, for example, for the engineers, how to prevent similar bugs in future. So the metric here can be something like repeating problems. So not just because any software has bugs inside, and the question is if you're able to fix it and prevent from a similar problem appear in the future. Another question, a long one, I think. Imagine the administration of a non-profit organization implementing research for development project. My challenge are to make sure that staff performance are tracked and customer satisfaction improved. The problem is that some customers do not plan their request for service and everything is urgent. Solution: how to improve collaboration for a better service delivery, quality, speed. Yeah, this was a question. What is the solution? Thanks in advance. Thank you for a question. It's actually very interesting to think about this case. If we're talking about customer satisfaction, like step 1 and 2, in the context of urgent requests from the customer, what it means for how do we define a satisfied customer when we're talking about some urgent requests? So the customer's viewpoint is that the problem was solved quicker. And obviously the opposite viewpoint, the service viewpoint, is to prevent such urgent cases from happening. Yeah? Or at least being prepared for these urgent cases. And the action plan in this case, if you want to balance this, is to suggest something that would reduce the number of urgent cases. So how to do this? Look at what cardiologists did. They introduce you a maintenance plan and tell you that each like once a year you need to go to service and to do some technical stuff. You need to change some filters, you need to change oil, you need to do this, and they give you a calendar, and if you follow this calendar, you're on the green zone. If not, they will tell you, okay, that's your fault, that your car is not moving today. That's the idea. And that's the idea, the action plan in this case. You can also introduce some additional action plan, like, for example, doing some kind of benefits for planning something in advance, or penalizing for not doing this in advance. Again, I think car dealers are a really good example to learn about how to deal with urgent requests, because they are doing everything possible to make the process of owning the car more predictable, let's say, not having surprises. So I hope this gives you some starting point for the discussion. Another question: how to find the right indicators to manage the sustainability of the hand of quality and innovation. We have already talked about sustainability before, but I'd like to focus on the innovation side. Actually, what is innovation? Innovation is not about just finding some good ideas. It's about being able to recognize them, and of course, it's about being able to implement them. As for the training, understanding of training effectiveness, we had a Kirkpatrick model with 4 levels. We can come up with similar 4 levels model for innovation. So on level 1, we have a number of ideas. On level 2, we have, let's say, we have more details about these ideas, and we can estimate the quality of these ideas. Hopefully, we have some high quality ideas from all the ideas that we have got in step 1. And then we need to try to implement these ideas, level 3. And once those ideas were implemented, we need to look at the performance results. So I think now it's a little bit easier to understand how to track innovation. Okay, and let's talk about this in some context. What is the purpose of measuring innovation? What do you think is the right reason to manage innovation? If you want to make your employees to be more active about new ideas, that's one thing, and you can respectively measure the number of ideas. You can think about action plan for this. You have probably some excessive budget here that you're looking to invest, and in this case, your action plan, your measurement efforts will be focused on different areas. You can probably measure the level of innovativeness, of how innovative the environment is, and you can find some good metrics that you will be able to use to test if this environment is actually is supporting your innovation. For example, the simplest one is the number of ideas that turned into experiments. Yeah. Because normally in the organization, people are willing to share a lot of interesting ideas, but there's simply not enough resources. This environment is not supporting innovation enough to try these ideas. So if you want to create an innovative environment, you need to look at this and the number of ideas that were actually turned into experiments, not into the big startup companies, but in small experiments. If, for example, you want to focus on the new ideas, on the number of new ideas, then you need to track the ideas that probably came from the users, because a lot of new ideas can come from the users, and you need just to listen them. And if you define the measurement direction this way, it's a different story, and you can measure it. You can come up with a respective action plan easier. Now, what would be leading metrics in this case? There are some basic metrics, but I believe they're really powerful. Look at your team. Do they have time to innovate? Or are they doing like a firefighting? Because if they don't have they don't have free time, don't expect them to innovate. Another thing that I think it's universal one, that your team need to be the user of your own product or of your own service. Because if people are actually using what they're selling, what they're producing, then believe me, they will generate you a lot of interesting insights and improvements and innovations, whatever you call them. General one, do they read books? Do they visit conference? How do they get an understanding about the world around them? And you can expect from the person who is not interacting with others to suggest some good innovation. Finally, if we're talking about the steps of the system, you have step 6.2, and be prepared for the experiments, because that's what innovation is about. And you normally deal with things that are not that easy to measure, that easy to predict. So be prepared for the experiments. I think this is enough to frame the idea of innovation a little bit, and I hope it will help you to frame innovation in your case. Next questions. Brand loyalty index. Again, do steps of the system from 1 to 3, and define what loyal clients is and what brand is. And I also do recommend to read this article by Oana Botiano on our website, which is called Measuring Customer Loyalty and Retention with KPIs. There are some good examples of specific metrics that you can think about. Probably they will fit your business as well. Accounts payable turnover. This metric, this KPI. Not sure if I understood this correctly, but as far as I see it, just a question of writing some query for your database and getting the right number. Plan schedule with actual status. Again, as far as I understood this, probably I'm missing some details, but it's about taking some formula and calculating it. Huge dollar value claims from external parties, yet you don't have control over the time for resolution. I think the starting point for this case would be to break down the big problem, which is not really defined in the question, but obviously you have it. To break down this big problem into smaller specific pieces, into smaller specific issues. And probably it will be really interesting to look at the bottlenecks. Probably that's where you will find a lot of insights. Okay, so we did the major part. And if you have any questions, feel free to write them in the comment box that you have in your video. And also, you are welcome to send some questions by email that I will show you how to do this. Need to go to our website, bcdesigner.com, this one, and you need to go to customer support contact form. Go there and send your questions by email. And I hope this will be able to point you to the right direction. So let me stop sharing my screen. And now I will check some questions if we have any. I think most of the questions were answered beforehand. Okay. Okay, so no questions so far. I'm happy because I was able to answer all your questions that you have asked before. If there is some login for this video, I will see these questions later, and I will be able to answer to you personally by email. And thank you all of you for your questions. I think that they help us to formulate the webinar to make it more interactive. And we'll see you during the next webinars, during the next workshops that we'll do. And hope you like it. Feel free to share the video that you will have later, the recording of this workshop. Probably it will be also split it into the smaller pieces so that we'll be able to use to point users to the specific segments, and to make it a little bit more useful for those who just get started working with the 12-step system for the KPIs. Thank you for your attention, and have a good day.